When a decorated sheriff moves his family into their dream home, he expects peace. Until the HOA sends hired muscle to evict him, they don't know who they're dealing with. What begins as a petty power play spirals into war. One badge, one family, and a neighborhood about to erupt. I had barely taken the last box out of the truck when the first sign of trouble showed up in the form of a 40-something blonde with a clipboard and the kind of walk that said she owned the planet. She didn't knock, didn't smile, didn't even look twice at the welcome mat my wife had just put down. She just marched straight across the grass, my grass, mind you, and stopped a few feet from my porch like she was conducting a home inspection she hadn't been invited to. "You must be the new occupant," she said, looking past me like I was a poorly parked car. "Name's Rick," I said, setting the box down and brushing the dust off my hands. "Rick Hunt." She wrote something down, didn't offer her name yet. Her eyes dropped to the American flag decal on the back of my pickup. "I see," she said flatly. "Just so you know, Spring Pines Reserve has very specific guidelines about exterior visual harmony. The board prefers neutral tones, muted earth colors, nothing too patriotic." It was one of those moments where I could feel my wife Linda's eyes on the back of my head. I didn't need to look. I could hear her thinking, "Don't engage, just smile and nod." But I've never been much of a nodder. "This is private property, ma'am," I said evenly. "And that's my truck. I don't recall freedom being color-coded." Her lips tightened like she'd tasted something sour, and she finally introduced herself, sort of. "I'm Karen Delaney, president of the HOA board. And here at Spring Pines, we take community standards very seriously. We require advance notice for all move-ins, especially when it involves large vehicles and visible furniture." I looked down at the hand truck next to me, still loaded with a box labeled Sam's Bedroom. Books and weird crap. Didn't realize I needed clearance to carry my kid's bookshelf through my own front door. Karen's eyes didn't flinch. "You'll find that our community thrives on order, Mr. Hunt. I'll be in touch. Please review the handbook you received in your welcome packet." Didn't get a packet. "I'll make sure one is delivered." She pivoted with the precision of a drill sergeant and walked off, again straight across the lawn like my landscaping was a public sidewalk. Linda stepped out behind me, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Well," she said, handing me one. "That didn't take long?" I took a sip, still watching Karen's back as she turned down the sidewalk and vanished behind a hedge. "Something tells me she's not a hugger." We laughed, but it was tight, restrained. Something about her put me on edge. Not the bossiness, I've dealt with worse, but the certainty. The territorial way she moved, like we'd stepped onto her land. My daughter Sam, who'd been stacking books in the front room, peeked through the window and mimed a salute. "We've been inspected, Dad. Are we allowed to use the bathroom now, or is that pending board approval?" That evening, as I sorted through more boxes in the garage, a crisp envelope was slid under the front door. No postage, just a Spring Pines Reserve HOA seal in cheap gold foil. The letter inside was a masterpiece of passive aggression, dressed in bureaucratic language. "This notice serves to inform you that your current activities appear to be in violation of several HOA procedural standards, including but not limited to unapproved driveway parking, unauthorized flag display, exterior aesthetic inconsistencies, and improper moving protocol." Improper moving protocol? What did they expect me to do? Teleport my couch? The kicker was the last line. "Failure to comply may result in formal warnings and fines as outlined in Article 14, subsection B of the Spring Pines Covenant Agreement." I'd bought houses before, lived under HOAs before. This one smelled different. This one smelled like it enjoyed power a little too much. That night, while Linda tried to find the coffee maker and Sam crashed on a pile of pillows in her half-assembled room, I took a walk around the property. It was a nice neighborhood. Too nice. Every lawn was manicured like a golf course. Every mailbox the same shade of beige. Streetlights stood at equal distances like military guards, and then I saw them, mounted security cameras on light poles. And not city ones. Private, HOA issue, and every single one pointed directly at my house. I stood there a while, arms crossed under the warm South Carolina moonlight, trying to remember where I'd read that quote. When the rules become the religion, tyranny wears khakis. Linda found me out front later, staring at the pole. "You good?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, "just getting to know the neighborhood." She followed my gaze, saw the camera, and sighed. "So what now?" I looked at her and smiled. "Now," I said, "now the game starts." 2 days after we finished unpacking the last box, I was on the porch oiling the hinges on our new screen door when I heard the low, unmistakable rumble of a large engine idling too long. It wasn't the garbage truck, too early for delivery vans and too loud for a neighbor's SUV. When I looked up, a matte black van with no plates rolled to a stop in front of our house. The engine clicked off, and silence fell like a curtain. The doors swung open and 2 men climbed out. Correction, 2 walls with necks. One was bald and thick around the shoulders like he was carved from refrigerator parts. The other had a ponytail and mirrored sunglasses that didn't match his cargo vest, which bore the words Community Enforcement Division stitched in white thread. They walked straight up the driveway with the casual confidence of guys who either had a badge or really hoped no one asked them for one. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped down from the porch. "Can I help you?" The bald one pulled out a clipboard, though I doubt he could spell anything on it. "You Rick Hunt?" I nodded. "I am. We're here on behalf of the Spring Pines Reserve Homeowners Association," he said, like that was supposed to mean something impressive. "You've been flagged for unauthorized occupation of this property." I blinked. "You mean living in my own house?" The guy with the ponytail stepped closer. "The property you're currently occupying was marked for conversion, designated for future HOA administrative use. The board considers your presence a violation." Linda stepped outside, holding a gardening glove in one hand. Her eyes scanned the 2 men and landed on me. I could see the question in her face. "Is this real?" Ponytail continued. "You're going to need to vacate the premises immediately so the board can reassess the utility integration process. No hard feelings, just policy." Now I've heard a lot of nonsense in my time. Once had a guy try to explain how 12 pounds of cocaine weren't actually his because he was just holding it for a ghost. But this one took the gold. "You 2 got ID?" I asked, still calm. Baldy tapped his shirt. "Right here. Community enforcement." "Right," I said. "And I'm Batman." Ponytail didn't smile. "We're authorized to remove non-compliant residents by force if necessary." I looked past them. No other vans, no uniforms I recognized, no marked vehicles. Just 2 guys who thought they were the neighborhood version of the ATF. "You're threatening me on my own porch," I said, slowly reaching into my back pocket. "You're trespassing on private property, and you're impersonating law enforcement." Ponytail shifted, hand brushing his hip like he thought I might be carrying. Baldy stiffened. Then I pulled it out, my badge. "Rick Hunt," I said, holding it up at eye level. "Sheriff, Jasper County." Silence. Just the soft creak of the screen door as it swayed in the breeze. "You boys just made a big mistake." Baldy actually swallowed. Ponytail's mouth opened and closed like he was searching for a reset button. "Step off the property," I said, voice steady. "Hands visible right now." They hesitated, then turned and started backing away. That's when I pulled my phone and dialed dispatch. "This is Sheriff Hunt. I've got 2 suspects impersonating officials from a non-existent enforcement unit under the Spring Pines HOA. Threats were made. Send a patrol unit and prepare for detainment." The moment they heard me say sheriff into the phone, Baldy broke into a run, straight for the van. Ponytail was slower, tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. I pointed him to the curb and told him to sit. He complied. 2 patrol cars arrived in under 4 minutes. Darlene Ruiz, one of my best deputies, stepped out, hand already on her holster. "Boss?" she asked with a raised brow. "These 2 geniuses decided they had authority to evict my family," I said. "Tried to use intimidation, maybe worse. No ID, no paperwork, fake division. They were sent by the HOA." Darlene didn't ask for details. She cuffed them both, read them their rights, and shoved them in the back seats of separate cruisers. That's when Karen Delaney showed up. Her Mercedes pulled up fast, brakes squealing slightly as she stepped out in a sharp, salmon-colored pantsuit and the posture of someone late to a royal engagement. "What is going on here?" she demanded, marching over in heels that were too expensive for asphalt. I turned to her. "Your men threatened my family and trespassed on my property." Karen scoffed. "Excuse me? Those were community contractors. Not licensed, not registered, not even legal." Her eyes landed on my badge. "Wait, you're law enforcement?" "Sheriff," I corrected, "of this entire county." She faltered just slightly, the mask slipping. "That's not possible. The board was told you were some kind of tradesman." "Well, we all wear different hats, Karen. Mine just happens to come with a jail." She tried to pivot. "There's been a misunderstanding. They were only there to deliver a notice, which they tried to enforce with threats and intimidation." She pointed a trembling finger. "This is harassment. I'm going to file a complaint with the municipal board." I stepped forward. "And I'm going to file criminal charges, impersonation, trespassing, threats. Want to keep going?" She opened her mouth, but the words died there. My deputies had already started gathering statements from Linda and the neighbors who'd come outside. Cameras were rolling from doorbells. It wasn't looking good for her. One of the patrol officers held up a document retrieved from the van, an HOA eviction notice written on stationery with no legal header and signed only the board. Karen saw it. Her face drained. "Ma'am," Darlene said, stepping up, "we'll need you to come with us for questioning." "I didn't authorize this," Karen shouted, but the deputies didn't blink. "Then you won't mind explaining that on record," I said. As they led her away, she looked over her shoulder and hissed, "You've made a powerful enemy, Sheriff Hunt." I crossed my arms, watching the patrol cars pull out. "Funny," I muttered. "So have you." By the following morning, our quiet little street didn't feel so quiet anymore. Word had spread like wildfire. Apparently, the new guy in Lot 19 had handcuffed the HOA's golden boys and marched their queen off in the back of a patrol car. I caught more stares on my jog that morning than I did during my first week on the job as sheriff. What I didn't know yet was that Karen Delaney had contingency plans. That afternoon, while Linda was trimming the hedges and Sam was arguing with her tablet about some online class, a beige sedan with tinted windows parked across the street. The man who stepped out looked like someone who'd been born inside a courtroom. Slick gray suit, haircut so precise it probably had a lawyer on retainer, and eyes that scanned the world for liability. He walked right up to the edge of our property line but didn't step foot past it. Smart man. "Mr. Hunt?" he called with the exaggerated courtesy of someone about to serve you a lawsuit. I stepped out of the garage, wiping grease off my hands. "Name's Douglas Hart. I've been appointed interim president of the Spring Pines Reserve HOA while Mrs. Delaney is indisposed." Indisposed. That was one way to describe being escorted into the back of a patrol car. Doug offered a business card I didn't take. We believe there's been some unfortunate confusion regarding the nature of this community's governance structure. I'm here to clarify matters. I nodded slowly. Are you about to tell me I don't own my house? Oh no, he said with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. You absolutely own the house. The issue is whether your property falls under the jurisdiction of the HOA's community covenants. Our records show it does. I crossed my arms. I reviewed every document before we bought. There's no binding covenant. This house predates your cookie-cutter kingdom by at least 20 years. Doug didn't flinch. The board recently updated boundary maps following a vote to extend jurisdiction for aesthetic alignment. Aesthetic alignment? It's part of the Spring Pines Revitalization Directive. Ensures community standards are upheld across all properties visible from public thoroughfares. And this directive was passed when? 2 months ago. By a unanimous vote of the board, which you and your sister ran. He smiled again, still not blinking. If you'd like to dispute the application of jurisdiction, you're welcome to submit a formal objection, in triplicate, to the committee. And if I don't, we'd hate to see this escalate into a legal matter, Mr. Hunt. Really, we would. I nodded. Then you might want to look up who the local sheriff is. Already did, he said, turning on his heel. It's why we're proceeding with discretion. That night, we got hit with the next wave. First came the letters, certified mail couriered to the door like some kind of legal blitzkrieg. Alleged violations of HOA Article 13, including my front door color, the truck in the driveway, and unregistered use of security surveillance. They were written like a prosecutor's dream and a stand-up comic's nightmare. Then came the cameras. I caught them at 2 a.m. A guy crouching near the curb with a DSLR and a telephoto lens aimed straight at my garage. I flipped on the porch light and watched him scurry like a raccoon on meth. Pulled the footage from our own security cams, enhanced the plate, and ran it through dispatch. Registered to a private investigative firm out of Charleston. Guess who was paying the bill? Linda was rattled. Sam pretended she wasn't, but I saw the way she double-checked the locks before bed. The next morning, someone had scattered a stack of printed flyers around the neighborhood. Warning. Resident in Lot 19 refuses to comply with community codes. Active security risk. Documented aggression. Below it, a grainy photo of me holding a hammer while building a shelving unit. Real terrorist vibes. And then came Frank. I found the envelope tucked under my welcome mat just after dawn. No return address. Inside were copies. Photocopies of internal HOA documents, meeting notes, memos, emails. One line stood out, underlined in red ink. Convert 19 into community annex. Resident unlikely to resist if pressured swiftly. Use voluntary compliance strategy. I stared at it for a long time. I remembered Frank, an older guy with a limp, lived 2 doors down. Always nodded but never said much. I hadn't seen him at the last HOA meeting. Probably hadn't voted either. I slipped the papers into a manila folder and brought them inside. Over breakfast, I pulled up the original purchase documents from our sale and cross-referenced them with the parcel ID numbers in the HOA map Doug had dropped off. There it was, plain as day. My property was not listed in the original HOA boundaries, not even close. But on Doug's revised map, they'd drawn a new line, literally drawn with a ruler and blue ink, that included my lot. No vote history, no owner approval, no legal precedent. They were trying to annex my home with nothing but nerve and office stationery. I made copies, logged everything, set up a digital file with time-stamped evidence, reached out to a real estate attorney in Beaufort who specialized in property line disputes and HOAs gone rogue. I'd seen police corruption before, but this This was suburban warfare with pastel smiles and bylaws as weapons. That afternoon, I took a drive around the block. 3 houses had spring pine strong signs in the yard. One had a security camera pointed at mine. Another had a new "We Support the Board" sticker on the mailbox. But one window had a curtain pulled aside, and behind it I saw a little thumbs up. Frank. At least someone was still awake in this Stepford circus. I didn't know how far they'd push, but I was starting to wonder if they did. It was Thursday morning when the first lawsuit hit, hand-delivered naturally by the same weaselly courier who dropped off the last wave of HOA violations. This time it wasn't some empty threat. It was a civil suit filed in the Jasper County Circuit Court alleging 3 things: aggressive behavior toward community representatives, unauthorized surveillance of common spaces, and refusal to comply with the revised Spring Pines Governance Compact. I almost laughed reading it. Aggressive behavior? You mean stopping 2 muscleheads from forcibly evicting my family? Unauthorized surveillance? I had 2 motion-triggered cameras, one on the garage and one on the porch. And the so-called compact, that wasn't even signed by a quorum of homeowners. But it wasn't meant to hold up in court. It was meant to rattle the cage. Linda stood at the kitchen island turning the pages of the complaint like they might bite her. Can they actually sue you for this? Anyone can sue anyone, I muttered, flipping to the last page. Doesn't mean they'll win. What about all these so-called witnesses? That's when I saw it, an attached document labeled Community Incident Log. It had timestamps, names, and a still image from one of their mounted pole cameras. It was me, taken completely out of context, hammer in hand, face focused, probably assembling the patio set. They'd included it as evidence of intimidation. Jesus, I said under my breath, and they're framing me. That night I called in a favor. My old buddy Carl, a forensics guy I worked with back in Charleston, owed me a bottle of bourbon and some tech support. I sent him the image metadata. A few hours later, he confirmed it had been altered, cropped, stripped of timestamp, contrast boosted for effect. Classic amateur manipulation, but dangerous in the wrong courtroom. So I filed a counterclaim. I made it official. Rick Hunt v. Spring Pines Reserve HOA, Karen Delaney, Douglas Hart, and 10 John Does. The complaint included defamation, invasion of privacy, harassment, and attempted coercion under color of civil authority. And then I made it public. I called the local paper. I gave an interview on the record. I even sat for 5 minutes on a local radio show where the host introduced me as the sheriff who declared war on the HOA. Not quite the PR I wanted, but it got attention. Within 48 hours, I had reporters emailing me from Savannah and even one guy from a national watchdog group that specialized in abusive HOAs. The floodlights were on now. Karen and Doug could no longer do their dirty work in the shadows, which, as it turned out, made them reckless. The very next day, I received a visit from Mud Code Enforcement, Clark. 3 men in county polos showed up, clipboards in hand, saying they were responding to complaints about unapproved structural modifications. When I asked what modifications, they pointed to my tool shed, the one that had been there since the 90s. Anonymous tips said it was recently constructed without a permit, one of them said, not meeting my eye. I pulled out the deed and permit record. Everything was legal, grandfathered in, signed by the previous owner. Then I showed them the security footage of the last week. No construction, no changes. One of the guys, older than the others, rubbed the back of his neck. Off the record, this smells like a hit job. We've gotten 6 similar calls about your address in the last week, all from concerned residents. I didn't need a name. I had a full house of suspects already. Then came the bombshell. My lawyer, Gwen Booker, called me one afternoon from Beaufort. She sounded annoyed and a little impressed. "Rick," she said, "they've filed a restraining order." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Against me?" "Yes, they're claiming you've made members of the HOA feel unsafe, that you've been seen patrolling the streets with a weapon, which I'm assuming is your sidearm, which I wear legally as a sworn officer." She sighed. "They're pushing for an emergency injunction to have you barred from HOA meetings, common areas, and get this, your own street after dark." It was a setup, a calculated push to provoke me, bury me in litigation, paint me as the very threat they'd invented. But it backfired, because by then I'd been collecting everything, every letter, every edited image, every recorded conversation with HOA reps. And then Frank came through again. He met me at the diner on Route 17, tucked into a booth like we were in a spy movie. The man slid me a USB drive and said, without making eye contact, "You didn't get this from me." "What is it?" "Board meeting recordings. They're not supposed to exist, but Karen recorded everything, even the stuff off the books." I got home, plugged it in, and queued up the first file. The audio was scratchy, but the voices were clear enough. Karen: "He's dangerous. If we wait too long, he'll start throwing around his badge. We need to escalate. Use the intimidation narrative." Doug: "What about fabricating a violation, something we can use in court?" Another voice: "We've got the footage. Just crop out the timestamp. Nobody will know." I sat back in my chair, heart beating like a drum. This wasn't just petty suburban politics anymore. This was a conspiracy. I spent the next 2 days compiling every document, every video, every audio clip. I backed it all up in 3 places. Uploaded one copy to my attorney, sent another to the district attorney's office. I wasn't just building a case, I was digging a grave for the entire board. When the media caught wind of the recordings, the story exploded. Local HOA faces allegations of conspiracy, evidence tampering, harassment. My phone rang nonstop. Neighbors I hadn't even met came by to shake my hand. Some just dropped off coffee like it was a silent apology for not stepping in sooner. But I didn't need applause. I needed justice. And I was going to get it, in court, in daylight, in front of a judge who couldn't be bought and cameras that couldn't be edited. They wanted war? They just declared it on a sheriff with a badge, a case file, and a goddamn USB full of receipts. The courthouse in Beaufort smelled like old paper and air conditioning that hadn't been serviced since the Clinton administration. The walls echoed with the kind of bureaucratic tension you could only find in a room full of lawyers pretending to like each other. I walked in with 2 manila folders tucked under my arm, one labeled evidence, and the other unofficially, checkmate. Preliminary hearings had been scheduled for early review of both lawsuits. The HOA's absurd accusations against me and my defamation countersuit against them. I brought backup, my attorney Gwen Booker, a certified hurricane in a pencil skirt, and 2 neighbors who'd agreed to testify. Faye Bell, a retired librarian whose window faced directly into my backyard, and Terrence Mendez, a single dad with a landscaping business who'd had his own scuffle with the HOA last year over a trampoline. Karen wasn't there, no surprise. Since the leaked audio hit the local news, she'd gone underground. No public comments, no HOA meetings, not even a peep on the Spring Pines Facebook group, which last week she'd used to post daily updates on community values. Instead, Doug Hart showed up with a team of 2 lawyers in navy suits and too much cologne. He tried not to look at me. I didn't return the favor. The judge, a stone-faced woman named Lila Thatcher, opened the hearing with the grace of a prison warden. She asked for opening statements. Doug's side droned on about escalating tensions and disruption of communal harmony. Gwen stood and in under 3 minutes handed the court a USB drive and said, This recording captures a conspiracy to fabricate evidence and defame a law enforcement officer. The rest is just noise. Judge Thatcher plugged in the drive, the courtroom speakers filled with Karen's voice, bitter and crystal clear. Crop out the timestamp. Nobody will know. Then Doug's. We need to act fast. Once he figures out the jurisdiction line, we're done. Thatcher paused the audio. Mr. Hart, she said slowly, is that your voice? Doug didn't speak. His lawyers did. Your Honor, we reserve the right to dispute the authenticity of the recording pending forensic review. Do that, she said. In the meantime, I'm allowing this as admissible under the preliminary hearing. She turned to me. Mr. Hunt, proceed. I walked to the front, dropped the evidence folder on the table, and opened it. These are the original purchase documents, zoning maps, and jurisdictional charts. This house was never under Spring Pines HOA control. These documents, I continued, flipping pages, are altered versions submitted by the board last month. Here are internal emails outlining an intentional plan to redraw boundaries illegally and displace me from my home. I nodded to Faye Bell. She stood and spoke into the mic, hands trembling but voice steady. I've lived across the street for 17 years. I watched those men come to Rick's house and threaten his wife. That wasn't community enforcement. That was a shakedown. Then Terrence took the stand and told the court about how the HOA had tried to fine him $900 for excessive joy noises when his son had a birthday party. The courtroom chuckled. Even the judge cracked a smile. Doug's team objected on the grounds of irrelevance. The judge overruled. Shows a pattern, she said. The next day, I met with the county auditor's office. The audio had triggered a formal request for a financial review of Spring Pines Reserve's spending over the past 3 years. I handed them documents Frank had left anonymously, expense reports for catered retreats, personal gas cards, and a mysterious vendor labeled consulting services that turned out to be Karen's niece. When the news broke, residents of Spring Pines started knocking on my door. Not out of fear, out of fury. One woman shoved an HOA fine into my hands, $200 for overgrown succulents. Another man showed me a photo of his car booted in his own driveway, courtesy of a private towing company hired by the board without approval. Gwen filed for an emergency injunction to freeze the HOA's authority pending investigation. The judge granted it. Effective immediately, Spring Pines Reserve HOA was barred from issuing fines, collecting dues, or making structural decisions. Doug's office was raided 2 days later. Investigators walked out with boxes of paper, hard drives, and Karen's personal laptop, which she had conveniently forgotten to wipe. I watched it all unfold with grim satisfaction from my porch, sipping black coffee as a van from the county records office idled across the street. When the dust settled, I walked down to Frank's house with a 6-pack of beer and a copy of the injunction. He opened the door and gave me that same tired, knowing look. Took you long enough. I handed him the document. You're the reason this whole thing cracked open. He nodded, took the beer, and said, let's make sure it stays that way. Back home, I sat with Linda and Sam in the backyard while the sun dipped behind the trees. For the first time since we moved in, I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel surrounded. I felt like I was finally actually home. Courtroom 3 was packed, not in the usual way, with bored clerks and exhausted lawyers, but with residents, reporters, and more than a few people who had probably never seen the inside of a courtroom before. I spotted at least 5 familiar faces from the neighborhood, including Mrs. Langley, who once filed an official complaint because my Halloween decorations weren't emotionally harmonious. Now she was in the front row with a notebook and a bag of popcorn. Literal popcorn. I adjusted my tie, not something I wore often, and sat beside Gwen as the bailiff called the session into order. Judge Lila Thatcher entered, robes billowing slightly behind her, and took the bench like a storm cloud settling over a mountaintop. This court is now in session regarding Hunt versus Spring Pines Reserve HOA et al. Karen Delaney was present this time, jaw clenched, dressed in muted gray and trying to look like the innocent face of suburban administration. Doug Hart sat next to her, pale, sweaty, and surrounded by lawyers who looked like they were billing by the second. We weren't here for a hearing anymore. This was trial. Over the course of 3 days, Gwen laid out the case like a slow, methodical scalpel across the board's pride. Every document, every audio clip, every surveillance snapshot was submitted, authenticated, and examined. The jury winced when they heard Karen casually suggesting my removal before he starts acting like he owns the place. He does own the place, Gwen reminded them deadpan. Testimonies followed. Linda took the stand. She described the fear, the threats, the day 2 armed men stepped onto our porch like they were collecting a debt from a casino. Sam testified too, reluctantly but bravely. She told them how she started sleeping with her earbuds in because she kept hearing whispers outside her window. How she was afraid to walk the dog alone. I watched Doug flinch at that part. Maybe even he had a line. Then came the audit team. An accountant from the county detailed a laundry list of misappropriated HOA funds. Spa visits, personal Amazon orders, a $3,000 charge labeled community development that turned out to be a hot tub delivery for Karen's backyard. The investigator from the county clerk's office confirmed that the revised property maps submitted by Doug were not only unofficial, they were forged. Digital signatures had been copied and pasted. Votes had been fabricated. One homeowner listed as in favor had been dead for 2 years. Gwen rested her case with a final photo, a whiteboard from a closed-door board meeting that read, "If Hunt pushes back, delay, divide, discredit." It was the last nail. When it was their turn, Doug's team tried to downplay everything. They framed it as a miscommunication and overzealous neighborhood management. Karen cried on the stand, said she was just trying to preserve community standards and had been manipulated by poor legal advice. Doug, to his credit, didn't lie under oath. He pled the fifth, repeatedly. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a stoic retiree named Curtis with a ponytail and camo jacket, stood and read the verdict. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff Richard Hunt on all counts. Gwen didn't smile. She nodded once and closed her folder like she'd just finished a crossword puzzle. Judge Thatcher sat forward. The actions of the Spring Pines HOA and its leadership constitute not only a gross abuse of authority, but a coordinated campaign of intimidation, deception, and retaliatory behavior against a legal homeowner who posed no threat beyond his unwillingness to be bullied. She turned to Karen first. "Ms. Delaney, this court finds you personally liable for harassment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of fiduciary responsibility. You are sentenced to 2 years probation, 600 hours of court-supervised community service, specifically within the Spring Pines neighborhood you once ruled, and a $35,000 civil penalty payable to Mr. Hunt." Karen looked like she might vomit. She didn't. Shame. Then to Doug. "Mr. Hart, your law license is hereby suspended for a period no less than 5 years pending review. You are ordered to pay $50,000 in punitive damages plus legal costs. You will be referred for investigation by the state bar and separately by the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution." Doug didn't blink. He just closed his eyes. The 2 contractors, TJ and Dallas, who'd threatened my family, already pled guilty to criminal trespassing. sentenced to 6 months of community work and a mandatory course in de-escalation and constitutional rights. And the HOA? Judge Thatcher's voice dropped half an octave. The Spring Pines Reserve HOA is hereby dissolved as a legal entity effective immediately. A court-appointed trustee will oversee the redistribution of funds, the audit of past decisions, and the administration of all outstanding complaints. All prior fines levied by the board in the past 24 months are nullified. You could hear the collective exhale in the room. I looked over at Frank. He nodded once. That was his version of a standing ovation. Then the judge addressed me. Sheriff Hunt, on behalf of this court, and if I may be so bold, on behalf of your neighbors, thank you for standing your ground. I stood, nodded, and said simply, "Happy to serve, Your Honor." The gavel fell, and with it the whole rotten empire of Spring Pines cracked wide open. It's been 3 weeks since Judge Thatcher dropped the gavel and made it official. I was no longer living under a dictatorship disguised as a neighborhood improvement committee. The HOA was dead, Karen had vanished from public view, and Doug was apparently trying to reinvent himself as a podcast host about resilient leadership. According to Frank, he had 3 subscribers, one of whom might be his mom. Spring Pines didn't collapse. It bloomed. Without the weekly threat of fines for trash bin placement infractions, neighbors started talking to each other again. The Halloween decorations came back, bigger, brighter, and weirder than ever. One guy on Cedar Loop set up an inflatable haunted castle that covered half his driveway. No one filed a complaint. Someone brought over dry ice to add fog. Faye Bell, the retired librarian who testified on my behalf, started a neighborhood book club, hosted outdoors, no permits required. Terrence Mendez began offering free lawn work workshops to teenagers looking to earn cash without being yelled at for mower noise violations. And Frank got a bench. No one knows who installed it. It just appeared one morning on the green space across from his house with a little engraved plaque that read, "For the man who didn't look away." He never mentioned it, just sat on it every evening at 6 o'clock sharp, reading a newspaper like he was waiting for someone to try him. As for me, well, the mailbox is still standing despite Karen's attempt to get it replaced with an approved, standardized model. The flag still waves on the back of my truck. The tool shed is still exactly where it's been for the last 30 years, minus the unnecessary surveillance. Linda finally planted those rose bushes she'd been putting off. Sam aced her online course and started walking the dog again, earbuds out, head up. She even joined the book club, though she mostly complains about how everyone picks books with no explosions in them. And the best part? Last Sunday, the county held a Community Appreciation Day. They gave me a certificate with my name on it and a free pie from Ms. Carlson's bakery. Cherry. Not quite justice, but sweet all the same. As I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the kids run down the street in Halloween costumes that were definitely a fire hazard, I caught sight of something unusual. A new couple moving into the old Delaney house, young, fresh-faced, optimistic. A clipboard-toting real estate agent trailed behind them, giving the usual pitch about community charm and shared values. I waited, and sure enough, the woman asked, "And the HOA?" The agent smiled brightly. "Oh, no HOA anymore. Not since the sheriff moved in. Things have been peaceful ever since." I grinned, took a long sip of my coffee, and muttered under my breath, "Damn right they have."